exercise selection is going to impact the amount of exercise you can provide inside a program, which then impacts the volume inside your program. And I really want to talk about what that all means. So every exercise creates some type of fatigue, and I don't want to be a fatigue coach that just really worries about that. But at the end of the day, there are obviously muscles, and there are exercises, and there's movement patterns, and then there's support and no support, stability, no stability, machine, no machine. That's going to impact the amount of fatigue or perception of effort towards an exercise, and therefore going to impact the amount of exercise or volume throughout a session, throughout a block. And that's all going to be, needs to be taken into consideration. And then this is all going to be taken into consideration, your age, your training age. And the coordination required for those movements, right? So we're going to leg press versus a squat. Immediately you should understand that squat's going to be more fatiguing, right? Coordination required, the high percentage of effort is greater, the amount of load is probably different. It's like, yes, there's probably less load than leg press, but that's because it requires more stability because there's less percentage of effort into a leg press. So immediately, you could do more working sets on a leg press than you can do a squat, but that doesn't mean that the leg press is more effective. It's actually relevant towards how much you're willing to be consistent in these exercises and be consistently progressing in these exercises. So if your percentage of effort towards a squat is quite high, in contrast to a leg press, and you want to allocate more volume to your legs to get the most out of it, then I would focus on leg press. But if you're keen to get really strong into squats and you're really good at allocating the right amount of leverage for your quads to be involved or your glutes to be involved relevant towards what you're trying to get out of the exercise, then I would focus on the squats. But that means less volumes required inside of a leg day because of that perception of effort is probably going to be still going to be high, and that coordination is still going to be high, but just not as high as someone who's scared of doing it. But it's still a movement that requires a lot of, that provides a lot of fatigue accumulation over time. Lateral raise versus a shoulder press, similar concept, right? Immediately you're like, cool, shoulder press is going to be a lot more fatiguing because it's a lot more load, it's overhead, and that exercise in itself is going to be, once again, more coordination required. That percentage of effort is going to be greater because the stronger you get out of that, the more you have to really work on it. In contrast to lateral raise, where most people don't train very hard on that, they don't train it very heavy, so the volume is going to be higher. And so once again, what's the question about allocating volume for a shoulder? It's just like, I would do both because they're both really important to train the shoulder. But if you want more volume, you can add more volume to a lateral raise in contrast to a shoulder press. But if you only had to pick two, it's going to be relevant towards your exercise, it's relevant towards your experience. If you're quite new to the gym, I would do both. But if you're only capable of doing one, I would do shoulder press because you can get the most out of it. If you want more volume, I'll then add lateral raise. T-bar, chest supported row in contrast with dumbbell row. This one's a weird one. It's just like, I would say that T-bar chest supported row is easier, predominantly because all you got to do is lay there, focusing your chest staying on the bar, on the chest pad, focusing on your pelvis staying on that pad and just pulling, in contrast to a dumbbell row where there's a lot of like setting up, intent, like getting the movement right. And then like once you progress in that, you now have to add more volume, add more load rather. So then you have to grab the dumbbells and put it down and then do it all over again. And that just accrues more fatigue. So I would say the T-bar chest supported row, it's like, if you had to choose, I'd do the T-bar chest supported row because you add more volume. It's not as complicated and doesn't require that much effort in contrast with dumbbell row. Seated leg curl and an RDL. Like immediately we know an RDL is going to require more fatigue because more stability, a lot more coordination, a lot heavier, and that once again the perception of effort is a lot higher. So allocating further volume to an RDL is there, right? You can probably do one, maybe two working sets with a seated leg curl. You can do 2 to 3. They're both got to hit the hamstring. One's got to hit the lengthen, one's got to hit the knee flexion. But if you can only pick one or the other, honestly, I don't care. Like if you're like, if you can execute seated leg curl better than an RDL, then I'd pick a seated leg curl. If you can do an RDL really well, then I would do both. That's the way I would look at it, because then we can hit the hinge position as well as the knee flexion position. And then got pec deck over bench press. They both hit the chest, similar to everything else. But bench press, you probably, that perception of effort is more difficult, that stability is higher, added more load. In contrast to a pec deck where you can just sit there and just like create circles. And therefore you can do like 3 to 4, arguably, because it's a shortened position, in contrast to bench press where it's a length position, requires more stability, requires more perception of effort. So that volume allocation is not going to be as high. So this is going to be really important to think about when you create a program, is that certain exercises provide more fatigue, require more coordination, their perception of effort's a lot higher or lower, their coordination is going to be greater or lesser, and shorten the length of position is going to allocate further or lesser volume fatigue, and one's going to, you can add more load and one's not. One's going to be supported, one's not. So these are all impacted on how much volume you can allocate inside the next side of the session.